I'm Mark Rhodes with New View Strategies. We originally presented this session at the User Group Summit North America 2020, and now we want to share our insights and experiences with you. Enjoy! Hello everyone, I'm Mark Rhodes, and I thank you very much for joining us today. We are covering why is user adoption so elusive and what to do about it. And I got to tell you, I am just thrilled to be doing this session. I've been talking about and coaching companies and working on and trying to understand better user adoption for quite a while, way back to my days with even Arthur Anderson. And it's encouraging and yet a little frustrating still that it's been such a topic of discussion over the years. You look at the summit schedule this year, there are 10 sessions on user adoption on the schedule. So obviously we still got some work to do. And I'm just hoping today, along with my teammate, Cynthia Prevey, to help you understand a little bit better about what are some of the core processes and symptoms and causes and everything else that goes along with user adoption. And more importantly, what can you do about it? Some solutions and some tools that will help you at your organization. So thanks for joining today. And I also want to say, even if you're watching this on the recording, I hope that you'll stick around to the end. Since we can't be in person this year, we decided to do something a little different, a little fun, and offer some prizes at the end of the session. We'll give you the details when we get there, including the grand prize is an Oculus virtual reality headset. It's the brand new one that's coming out. It's an all-in-one headset, and it looks really, really cool. So hopefully you're in for that. And before we go any further, let's get Cynthia on. Hey, Cynthia.
Hello, Mark. You gave away the special surprise.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I'll tell you what, I am really excited to be here presenting with you today. And all I can tell you is my passions are learning and sharing. And I've been doing that with NavBC since 2005. And this user adoption thing is not just a big deal today, but it's been a big deal since I started doing this job. So let's get into it.
Fantastic, thank you. And I got to say that Oculus VR headset, I really didn't know what it was about, so I'm very excited about it now. That's why I'm thinking about it. Anyway, hey, so if you're here, I'm guessing you may have some questions around user adoption. You may be struggling with it at your organization. Like I said, we want to unpack a bit of that, but more importantly, get some tools and resources and some solutions in your hands. So you know how to talk about it, you know how to address it at your organization, and maybe have a discussion with your team and figure out some solutions there so you can drive it forward. When I put this session together originally, you know, of course, I expected us to be in person. I was really hoping to have interactive discussions, but I think still will have some discussions as we're going through here. If you're watching this on the recording, we've got a couple places we're going to ask you to pause the recording, do a little bit of reflection, and think about your own situation, and hopefully have you come along with us that way. So, hey, Cynthia, let's go ahead and dive in. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. So as mentioned, talking about symptoms, sources, solutions, the first piece that we're going to jump into today, I typically call, when I do these types of sessions, couch time, because every one of us, we're in our own company, we're having these struggles. Just to know that there are others out there with those types of struggles and you're not alone is really helpful. I had to go with the S alliteration here. So fortunately, I found the word succour, which means assistance and support in times of hardship and distress. I think that's a pretty appropriate term for right now. So let's go ahead and dive in. So there we go. So Cynthia.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you a question right off the bat. Can you take just any skier, provide them with high-end ski equipment, and wham, they're an expert skier?
Well, I have a really cool, very pretty high-end ski jacket. And when I go cross-country skiing, I'm in Ohio, it's kind of flat. I still sit down on my butt when there's little hills. So the answer to that question would be no.
Right, of course, and kind of a foregone conclusion there, right? But it's funny to me. I think this is a really good analogy where every one of us has been involved in either a system implementation, an upgrade, what have you, some sort of project. And hey, you're putting in this new tool, it's got great capabilities, and you think it's going to make all this difference, and then you don't
Mhm.
see that kind of return. Well, guess what? It's just not that simple. And there's a lot more that goes into it, but you gotta plan for it, you gotta practice, you gotta train, right? And so,
Well, and let me say one more thing.
yeah,
If I take my really fancy ski jacket and I take those lessons like you described, and someone gives me courage, I might not be sitting on my butt as I go down those hills anymore.
I'm there for you, Cynthia. Next time you go skiing, call me, all right?
Okay, I'll do that.
I'm a great cheerleader.
Awesome.
Hey, so this is what's so interesting to me. Like I said, Cynthia and I have been talking about this subject for decades, and
Hmm.
it's still many of the same issues, right? There's no secret what's going on here. I don't want to go through these stats in particular, but provide you some discussion points, some details to have discussions at your own organizations. Again, it's no secret that user adoption is a challenge. Companies have dealt with this topic associated with ERP implementations and upgrades for decades, right? So no surprise here. Um, and no surprise as to why either. Here's one of many studies that you can find out there on the internet with like 30 seconds of search. The reasons are fairly well known. So it's really interesting to me, especially when companies know why projects have difficulty achieving the ROI that they're looking for. So we know a lot of the root causes and we know what it looks like, right? So there's no real surprises here anymore, but yet we still struggle with it. So I want to dive into that a little bit. But I think at the top level, I think, well, one, we're all human, right? Humans are complicated. And that's a pretty good reason why we struggle with this topic in general. But then also, a lot of times, I think companies lack a programmatic approach and they lack the tools necessary to really drive change and drive successful user adoption. So let's jump into that a little bit more.
Mark, I want to add one other point. I
Yeah,
think
thanks.
that another thing that might occur, or at least I've experienced, is the kind of putting the blinders on, because it is something that's a little, because it's dealing with people and interactions and it's not black and white, it's not data. It might be a little intimidating and a lot of organizations might not know where to start. So rather than dive in and deal with the challenge, they put blinders on.
Right. It is. It's very difficult to do it well. And I got to say, well, we'll talk about some of the projects I've been involved in. And even though I would know better, just getting the team on board and mapping out a process that works, it's very difficult when you got everything else
Mhm.
going on. You're trying to get the project done and so forth. Yeah,
It's intimidating, or can be.
intimidating is a great word there. I think one of the core issues is um, how do you even define user adoption, right? A lot of different ways to look at it, but even just having a common definition for your company, for your team, I think goes a long, long way in terms of really understanding, okay, then what are we trying to achieve? What does it look like and so forth? So I put together a couple definitions. One, realizing ROI, driving your business forward, right? Um, Honestly, why are we doing these projects if we're not trying to achieve outcomes, trying to improve something or many things, right? And you got to have that place as a starting point. We're not here to make people feel good. They should feel comfortable and equipped and so forth, right? But this really is about the business making a difference. Another definition then, a little bit different take. Again, using Business Central in the case that Cynthia and I deal with on an everyday basis or whatever system you're talking about, using that as a tool to achieve goals, to achieve an ROI. So define this for your company. And I also think it's not only about the project goal, it's about company goals, individual goals. We'll go into that a little bit more.
It's not just about using the system adequately.
Nah, no, no.
And that's I think what I've seen. Oh, they're good enough.
Yes,
It's
right.
happening. They know how to put an order in.
Yes. Exactly. Um, you know, does any company have the goal of, hey, let's just stay in business? No,
I hope
right?
not.
That's a pretty bad goal. I mean, it's a goal, but you got to set yourself sights a little bit higher than that. Yeah.
Agree.
So if we had a lot more time, we could really spend some time on just these fundamental, what I consider to be truths. Again, I think this is a helpful starting point for discussions at your company to just get everybody on the same page about what your perspective is relative to user adoption, what it's about, what you're trying to achieve. I will touch on that first one. We call it user adoption. It's a very singular term, user, yet when you get down to it, I don't think there are a lot of things that the user can influence on their own and wholly, right? It's many, many times a mixture of what's happening with the individual, but more importantly with the company, and we'll go through some of that. So I think that's a pretty important point to think about.
I think the other caveat to that, or taking that a little bit further, is it's also not organization adoption, because if we called it that, it would be more about a thing or
Right.
something esoteric as compared to the user. And every user's different. And you're going to have users
Yes.
who will push
Yes.
back when they're uncomfortable. You'll have users who dive in when they're uncomfortable. So the users have some ownership in this, but ultimately it's the organization's job to make sure that user adoption happens across the board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We got a lot more to talk about with that. So let's go ahead and we're going to dive into symptoms. So I think a great place to start is to have meaningful conversations with your team, with your company about where are you with user adoption? What's the history been about? And then what are you trying to achieve with your particular project or initiative? Gosh, month or two ago,
Mhm.
I wrote a blog. I've actually written several blogs around this topic recently, but in particular, wrote a blog on our website. Which, Cynthia, what's our website?
GetYourNewView.com.
Good. Want to make sure you're still with us. Good. Hey, wrote a blog that I included this table in the blog and described it as a litmus test to see where you're at with user adoption in your company, and again with what you're trying to achieve. Are you basically looking forward and really trying to foster a culture of continuous improvement? Or are you stuck in the status quo and you're okay with that, right? And I think having those kind of questions come up and have an open discussion around that can really surface some core issues and really, again, help people to get centered in the right direction.
Agreed. And I think seeing something in black and white and being able to sit down in a group and talk through these individually is a lot better than just sitting down and saying to everybody, okay, so what do you think?
Yes, yes. And let's not forget kind of the five whys, or in this case, the how, right?
Hmm.
You pose this question to the team and okay, do we participate in continuous learning? Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course we do. Everybody wants to continue to learn. That's an easy one. Okay, how? Start asking, right, the detail about how is that happening? How is that being fostered? How is that being supported, right? And that'll really open up some conversations for you. The link for that blog I mentioned is at the end with a couple other resources for you. So no need to go look for that yet. So I like to think about Abraham Lincoln when I'm thinking about user adoption. What do you think, Cynthia?
Well, I have to admit, when we first put this together and you showed me the slide and asked me if I knew why Lincoln was here, I have to admit I did not.
And so before I answer the why, again, if you're recording or watching the recording, go ahead and hit pause. And I want you to just take a moment to reflect about what is user adoption what does user adoption look like at your company and with your team? What's happening there? What are some of the concerns you have? Just do a little reflection before we move on. All right, so I hope that was helpful. And okay, let's talk about Abraham Lincoln. He said, "A divided house cannot stand." That was further requoted by Mike Brady in 1971, and I think it's still a quote to remember, especially nowadays in our current environment. Um, He,
What Brady Bunch episode was that?
what's that?
What Brady Bunch episode was that?
I am trying to think. Let's see. I got this. Was that the one where they had to collect the S&H green stamps to get the
I
prize?
don't know. You
Couldn't
said
agree
Mike
on.
Brady. That's what came to mind. Sorry.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And they ended up buying a tent or something. I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway, always look to Mike if you got questions. So
Sorry, couldn't resist.
Abraham Lincoln understood the importance of shared goals, and I think that's a
Mhm.
great place to start as you're trying to start on your new journey towards better user adoption at your company.
And you're going to see this theme as we continue through this presentation, and it's really important to remember.
If you don't have goals, what else you got? How's the team ever going to achieve what you're hoping to achieve with certain projects, certain initiative, if you don't have goals and you don't have a program around those goals to meet those goals, right?
Mhm.
Again, in the abstract, seems so simple. And again, we want to provide you some of the tools to have those conversations and really get to these what would often become very complex issues within your team and your
Right.
organization. So I already mentioned before, right? Besides project goals, you certainly have to have individual goals. You have to have company goals, right? And they all have to align. Because if they're out of line, then what's going to get done and people are going to get confused. One of my favorite goals of all time is get the project done on time and on budget. Cynthia, you've come across that goal before, right?
Uh, it's a common theme in just about every project I've been involved with. That was one of the first things that's brought up, and that's the goal.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a goal, but really, is that what you're trying to achieve with the project? Is that a successful project? And so you've spent a lot of money to bring a project in on time and on budget. No, that's not what you're doing that for. So, okay, fine goal, but focus on what really matters in driving the business forward. Now, we say you've got good goals, you're going to have to measure progress towards those goals. And
Mhm.
I think it's a really good question to say, can you even measure user adoption?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, if I'm talking about that, though, where do I even begin to say, okay, I've got 100% user adoption, or I'm being challenged right now? Where do I even begin?
Exactly. We threw out a couple measurements, potential criteria here for
Hmm.
you to consider. Again, you really should tailor this according to what your goals are at your company and also your culture. We haven't even touched on the culture point yet, and we'll come back to that. Interesting thing here. I don't know if you noticed this, Cynthia. We have goals that can either be positive or negative.
Very true. Very
Yeah.
true. And in fact, I think, you know what, the more I think about it, that's a really key point out of this, because if you're constantly focusing on one side of it, oh, we're going to do more of this and this will be better, et cetera, and we don't start looking at where we have problems and or what the negatives are that need to be resolved, for example, error rates, that type of thing, then you're missing maybe 50% of how you can measure true user adoption of the system.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Would you think it would be that high, or do you think I'm being a little aggressive on that number?
Well, depends on the company, but no,
Yeah.
I think it's a perfect place to start in talking about where are we right today before you even
Yeah.
look going forward, right?
Good and bad.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Very true.
All right, so we've started giving you a foundation, a framework to work with. Let's go ahead and talk about sources. Where does all this come from? Which helps you then further identify, okay, what do we do to fix it? So let's start drilling into some root causes. And again, boy, uh, this is a slide I would love to spend probably an hour alone on.
We don't have an
Cynthia,
hour.
please, because there's a lot to talk about here, a lot to really uncover. All right, we'll keep it to what, 5, 10 minutes. But
Please.
when we talk about root causes, I think again, if you're watching the recording, this is a great place to go ahead and pause. Think about what's happening at your company and with your team. Think about what are potentially the root causes happening that are leading to both positive and negative user adoption, right? Go ahead and it's good to identify both, and then you can rejoin us here. All right, so hopefully that was an enlightening exercise. Maybe you talked to some of your teammates and got their input as well. And before I show you this slide, I'll tell you again, this is, we can't talk through everything on here, but hopefully this is a great discussion tool for you, for your company and your team. We really wanted to lay out a lot of potential root causes for lack of user adoption or places to focus on driving better user adoption with. The important point with this is, as we mentioned previously, it's almost always a mixture of individual components and organizational components. And so when you look at the slide, don't pay too much attention where the bubbles are. It's basically spacing, just trying to get it all in. But the important point again is it's always a mixture. And I do want to talk about two elements in particular here because they really come up a lot more than many other root causes when you read about, you look at research and so forth, and think about what are the core issues with user adoption. Poor system design is one of those. I think it's typically in a system implementation, even in an upgrade, you sure better have some dedicated time and worthwhile time thinking about what are our processes, how's the software work, what can we do to take better advantage of the software and really align those two concepts. So many companies just focus on the short term, or they focus on just getting it to work, and they overlook this point. And boy, this can be one of the deepest causes of lack of user adoption, because then you roll the system out and users can't use it, or it's too hard to use. There's too many clicks. They're wasting time every day. They're not being efficient. It's very, very distracting. And it's
Or
such a simple
or
thing.
they're not seeing any benefit. This isn't any better than what I had
Yes,
before. Why
perfect.
did you make me go through all of this? There's no benefit to me. When you purchased the system or decided to upgrade because those benefits were there, but you don't make it part of the project to pull those out, you lose that energy, you lose that positive outlook, and they're like, I did all this work for nothing.
Cynthia, I read in one of the articles that said you rolled out this fancy new system and it does the same thing I can do in Excel, but I can do it much faster in Excel.
Right.
Why even use the system, right? I said, wow, that puts it on the nose, doesn't it? But it's very valid.
Well, and sometimes you have to communicate that maybe something that is coming down the pike couldn't be done at the initial implementation, but at least being aware of that, having that be planned for, and putting it really on the schedule as compared to some nebulous date out in the future. If you do have to roll out basic because of constraints, it will help with user adoption if they see value to themselves somewhere along the line.
You know, later in the deck, we have the adoption curve, and that what you just described speaks highly to that, and why executive management oftentimes doesn't foresee a problem with user adoption, doesn't understand it, right? Because they know what the future holds. They know why we're doing this project and the expected outcome, right? In their
Right.
minds, it's pretty clear, which obviously it should be, right?
But
But
I think the larger the organization, the less likely that is to be the case.
right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, great points. The other bubble I wanted to highlight here is lack of continuous learning or ongoing learning.
Hmm.
And I've been doing a lot of research recently on the forgetting curve. There's Erman Ebbinghaus figured this out in the 1880s. Humans forget 80% of what we learned in 30 days. It's just
Wow.
biological, right? So, hey, you get this big project, this big upgrade. get everybody trained up right before go live, and then what happens a month after go live. But, you have to have ongoing learning, even relearning the same things, refresher training, we call it at NewView. And so to continue to reinforce where you're trying to get the team to, basically. It's actually very straightforward science.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting because another thing that I have learned over the years, and I'm just going to pull a scrap piece of paper here, is that if I train somebody on something, I've trained them with this much information. And then they, even the very next day, or even maybe after some review, go and train somebody else that
Yeah,
very same lesson. And this is the amount of information that person will get from that training.
right, right.
Then guess what happens when that person trains another person?
Yep, we see it all the time. Exactly.
And so I think all of this affects user adoption because I sure as heck want to be the person that gets this training, not the person that gets this training.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just
Again,
saying.
just basic science, people.
It is. It is.
Cynthia, do you want to comment on any of these other brightly colored
You
bubbles
know, when we were preparing this session, I was like, oh, there's so much I could talk about here.
here? Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I've noticed as a big stumbling block is personal history and biases. So if I could pull out that personality piece again, as I mentioned earlier, everybody learns differently. Everybody's going to look at this differently. Some people are going to focus on positives and negatives, but you're going to find that who you think might be your champions or cheerleaders that will help everybody come on board may not be those cheerleaders, and someone else in the organization that maybe isn't in a role of authority could be the most enthusiastic. And some of it happens because maybe that higher up person, they've got some history there, or maybe they've got some history with interactions with different people in the organization on completely unrelated, whether it's personal or business. So you've got to really be aware of looking at everyone and determining maybe I have a department head that is a root cause of my user adoption problem. They're a phenomenal manager, but they might not be the right cheerleader or the right person to foster that culture of learning, the user adoption, positive energy, constant looking for improvement. Maybe they're not the person who's always saying there's got to be a better way and gets involved in the project. So really look at the people again. I'll keep bringing it back to the people, I guess.
You have a great term for those surprise cheerleaders, don't you?
The incidental cheerleaders?
Incidental cheerleaders, yeah. They, they always pop up, don't they?
They do. They do. And if you're not looking for them, they're also commonly not necessarily the person who's going to basically volunteer or put themselves out there. They're kind of doing it behind the scenes and they're cheering everyone along. So you need to find them and bring them into the fold and make them part of what drives the project, and you'll have a lot more success than you would if you didn't, obviously.
Bring such a great energy and speak
Mhm.
to everybody and with the right language. Those are so much, they're so much fun to work with. Yeah, love when that happens. So again, take this, sit down with your team, have some open discussions about what you're trying to achieve and what the current state is. I think to really take it back up to the highest level, you really have to address the why. Why are you doing these projects, these initiatives? Why are these the chosen tools that you're using, and why are they going to help you achieve your company's goals and your team's goals and so forth? So, got to address the
And
why.
and back to the person, to the people, who does that why matter to, and who is going to
Yes,
be your
yes,
incidental cheerleader of the why?
yeah, yep, bingo. All
Mhm.
right. So we talked about those root causes, those sources, give you some words, some lexicon, right, to facilitate those conversations. Let's get into tools, resources. How do you really start making progress and facilitate change? So let's talk about solutions. So all the companies I've talked to about user adoption, helped them with over time, and the research I've done, the training I've had, I've settled on these 5 elements relative to having those discussions, setting the goals, monitoring progress, and talking about the elements that need to be in place. And so we're going to walk through each of these for just a minute or two on each. But we want to, again, provide you with a checklist for discussions and actions at your own company. The key point here is ROI, return on investment. Whatever you're trying to achieve out of your project, guess what? It's going to take time, effort, and money, and you just don't get something for nothing, right? So you do have to think about the resources you're going to dedicate to this to make it work. It's a fundamental truth, again, to dedicate time and resources to make something happen. So let's start walking through this. Executive commitment. Hey, Cynthia, this is number 1 for a purpose, right?
It absolutely is. And we have a lot on this slide, and we're not going to go through every single item on this slide. But really, what it comes down to is from the executive or the top down, it's about attitude and action. It's doing what you say and meaning what you do, and
There we
having
go.
that positive attitude. It's top down.
That's right. So key. Uh, and and I'd like to throw out some examples too from just the projects I've been involved with. Just give you a little bit of color commentary around what these elements are truly about. One of the best, probably the best ERP implementation I've been involved with is when from the get-go executive management said, okay, we're going to do what's right. One, they're going to pull the right people off the front lines and dedicate them to the project. And they were involved in the design, the testing, user training, and they were the go-to people after go live because they knew the system backwards. But not only did they do that, they backfilled their roles. They didn't say, which I see so frequently, hey, be on the project team and then also do your normal job. That never, ever, ever works. They found people to back them up so they didn't have to worry about that and they could be dedicated full time.
Well, I just want to say I've seen some success with maybe a little bit of a hybrid of that, where they pulled the people off of the front lines for a dedicated amount of time in the week because maybe they didn't have the luxury, they weren't large enough, or didn't have the dollars to pull
Sure.
them off completely. But
Much
it's
more
very
realistic, right?
important, but
Yeah.
dedicated, no
Yes.
excuses, set aside the time.
Yep. Got to do it.
Yep, absolutely.
We touched on culture alignment earlier. Really didn't dig into it. So what do we mean by cultural alignment, Cynthia?
Well, I will tell you, one of my favorites is Einstein, and he tells us that the significant problems we face today can't be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. So you may find
Ooh,
that culturally, what, you don't like my Einstein quote?
no, that's a great quote. Perfectly true.
Yeah, I have lived by this for many, many years,
Yeah.
and I've shared this with many organizations because you could have a great organization, but you find you have people who are beating their head against the wall because they're doing things the same way. So part of this opportunity with this project for a new ERP system is to also look at how you're doing things internally, what actions you're taking, what attitude you have, and what you're encouraging people to do.
Yes. And there's extrinsic. What's that word? Extrinsic. Yeah.
I don't
And
know. I can't say that word.
intrinsic elements to this, right? And people feel both.
Hmm.
Hearing it, but seeing it in action, right? Those both have to line up. That's so important. I think about a ERP implementation I did with a company in Orlando, and they started the project day one doing process mapping, right? Current state and then future state. And I took 2 things away from that. One, it said we want to improve. And in the future state mapping, they said, what can the system do for us and how are we gonna adapt our processes to take advantage of that? But 2, and probably more importantly, they said to the team, we value your input. We want you to determine how we're gonna do business going forward. And boy, what a strong signal that sends to them.
I will tell you what, and by having that approach, you're going to find individuals in the organization that you may not have known existed that are going to be forward thinking, that
Yes,
are going to be your strongest proponents for the
Yes.
new system. They don't have to be the managers. They might be somebody behind the scenes that you didn't really know other than having coffee with them in the lunchroom. And I'll tell you what, they become your incidental cheerleaders.
Incidental cheerleaders. That's right.
Yep.
Clear business case. You'd think this is maybe a no-brainer, but it's rare that I do see a really good business case. Doesn't have to be extensive. Doesn't
No,
have to be complicated. It can be a page or two,
but it has to be in black and white.
black and
You
white.
have to know what you're trying to accomplish and how. And
Yeah.
again, we've got some key points in here that you can look through and basically build that foundation for that black and white definition of that business case.
If it's not black and white, then how are people really going to understand it? How do you even remember it? It'll get interpreted over time. You know what you just did, Cynthia? You outlined a really simple approach for a business case. You said the how and the what. You throw in the why and the who, and right,
Right,
and you're
right.
answering the basic questions that you need on paper, right?
Yeah, and you don't need anything fancy. Throw together an
Exactly.
Excel spreadsheet, put some columns out there. There you go.
Project I was involved with, the CFO said basically, we need to close the books faster. We need to reduce our receivables. I mean, very straightforward, right? But guess what? That really centered the team to understand, okay, how are we going to take advantage of the software to accomplish those things? How are we going to improve our processes, right? And it gave them
Right.
those measurable outcomes to really judge. And people felt like it was a win because they were able to do that. It's
You'll
beautiful.
see a lot of project plans where they call it the success criteria. The success criteria is that we close our books in 15 days because it's been taking us 30 days. And when we
Yes.
talk about user adoption, if the users understand that, and you're one of those users that gets to improve their world by spending not 30 days on closing the month, but 15 days, they now have the opportunity to do other things in their job. And talk about a big boost for user
Yeah.
adoption. Oh my goodness,
Oh, that speaks to our hearts, doesn't it? Continuous improvement and being able to do
yes,
more. Whew, that's good.
constantly. Mhm.
Solid project methodology. I want to comment on this for a second because, well, both Cynthia and I have done project management for, well, almost forever. And, you know, this is one of those things where you understand its importance, but its impact on user adoption, that's usually, you don't think about those two things in the same sentence. And I've seen plenty of times where not having solid project management really drags down the team, and boy, it has a lasting impact. It's a shame, but it's hard to understand that connection.
Yeah, and you have to be careful because whether you're doing waterfall or agile, you have to realize that the project management isn't just about managing timeframes and budget hours, it's about managing people. And you going back to that, every person is different and the way people react is different. You have to keep in mind that this management is driving energy.
Yeah.
And if your project management approach is dragging down the energy of your project or pushing that energy in the wrong direction, you're going to have problems. So you got to be careful that you're not too rigid or you're not too agile because you're working with people and energy.
One of my favorite tools, simple graphic of all time, is this triangle. When you talk about project management, right?
Hmm.
Those are the factors that are involved, and it's pretty straightforward. And you affect one, it's going to affect the others, and you have choices to make. Oh gosh, an implementation that went horribly wrong was really keyed off from the start because of lack of scope control. And this will sound familiar, right? The president said, "We're going to have this done in 5 months." Period. Had no basis whether it was really going to take 5 months, but that was it. Told the team 5 months, make it happen. So the team didn't know how to handle scope change, didn't know how to handle even the design of it, because if we found anything that didn't fit, well, what do? You're either extending the project or you got to borrow from something else or you have to ignore it. And guess what? They didn't get it done in 5 months because they didn't have a usable system after 5 months. Well, we could go over a long time on that one, but let's move on.
Well, I'm going to say one more thing.
Oh
The
yeah,
other thing would have been that they had to go to the person who said it's going to take 5 months. And that was probably a bigger deterrent than some of those others.
And the culture was when edicts were given, the edicts were followed. There was
Right.
no opportunity for discussion on that. So yeah,
Not too positive energy though, right?
no. Hey, and Cynthia, you talked about this before. There is, of course, the element of the individual. So we've got good old Witham. What's in it for me?
Yes. Well, when I was thinking about this topic, and I realized when I was looking at successful user adoption and projects, because they go hand in hand,
Mhm.
I was realizing that sometimes the hindrance here is when everything is being managed or handled internally. Sometimes it's advantageous to have an external individual or someone who doesn't have all that baggage that we talked about earlier
Yeah.
involved in here, because it allows stakeholders to speak up maybe where to someone independent that they might not have felt comfortable speaking up
Yeah.
for if it was an internal person.
I think that's smart. That's a smart idea. And the one I'm going to highlight is quick wins. Boy,
Mm.
don't underestimate the power of a quick win. Find those little nuggets that make a little bit of difference for somebody that they do every day, right? And it shows that you're designing the system with them in mind, and also, that you're seeking process improvement. It's such an easy one to do, and there's usually a lot of them available.
You just made me think of something too. If you have someone who's outside of that area, maybe it's somebody from a different department internally that's involved in looking, they're going to have a different perspective on things. They might find those quick wins that
Oh
you
yeah,
wouldn't see, because remember what Einstein said, you may be trying to solve the problems of today using the same thinking that you used to create the problems in the past. So
yep,
having
exactly.
someone come in might help you find those wins easier.
Cynthia, how are we doing on time?
We're doing really good. We have about 7.5 minutes left.
7.5 minutes. That sounds great. I'm going to go through a bunch of tools pretty quickly here so we can make sure we
Excellent.
have time, talk about our giveaways that we're doing. But let me just highlight each of these for you. I think we touched on this earlier. Cycle of change. Yes, we were talking about executive management usually ahead of everybody else. They understand why you're doing the project, what the expected outcomes are, the how, why, what, where, and so forth,
Mhm.
right? And guess what? They're further along this curve than everybody else, right? They've already been looking at doing this project. They've made the decision. They've evaluated the expected benefits and so forth. Kind of hard to do this in the virtual sense, but basically everybody's going to move across this curve. They'll move across it at different rates, and those in the know will be further along the curve than those. So you have to remember that when the executives and folks that have been involved for a long time in the project get into kind of phase 4, right, and they're feeling very optimistic, and when are we moving on to the next thing, the rest of the team might still be in phase 1 or dipping into phase 2. And so that would explain why people have different perspectives at different time. Everybody's going to go through this, and really your goal is to reduce that time and reduce the depthness of that dip into the pessimism area, right? You want to make sure that people are feeling good and staying motivated, and again, clear on the who, what, why, how, all of that.
Agreed.
This is a great tool that I love, just simply called stakeholder analysis. What you do is you take all your stakeholders, which include customers, vendors, trading partners, anybody, people that you have to report to, right? The board and so forth, group them up and understand, okay, where are they at? And more importantly, what kind of commitment do you want to get out of them, right? Because those that you're really counting on, uh, you're going to identify those as high risk people and spend more time and effort making sure that they're accounted for, that they're taken care of as part of that project. Really helps you to focus your efforts as you're moving through it and further define the goals, right? Of down to the team level, down to the group level, which further refines exactly how you can achieve those goals and what you have to do to help them out. Powerful tool that leads to a whole lot of discussions, yet deceptively simple. I love it.
Interesting. I think it's the first time we've really brought up customers and vendors as stakeholders.
Hmm.
And the other one we need to remember is our external auditors or our financial advisors.
Now we
Those, yes, we do. Some of those changes might be driven by banking requirements
right.
or other requirements, segregation of responsibilities,
Mhm.
division of labor, depending on what you want to call it. You need to keep that in mind.
Bring them along. Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
And what this is, just another representation to really hone your focus, right? You take that the stakeholder analysis and map it against influence, impact, and the size of that group, and boy, that paints a pretty clear picture of where you got to focus pretty quickly.
And by the way, graphs and charts are a great way to share this information throughout the project.
Indeed, yes, yeah, great point. The organizational assessment, again, another fairly deceptively simple tool. We go with the consumer reports kind of bubbles here, but it helps you, again, to look at those groups and break it down across different elements, right? It's not just about the training. We touched on this earlier, right? You train them up, they know how to use the system and good to go, right? No, you really got to make sure that everything's aligned to make sure that people feel equipped and competent and positive going forward, right? So you have to think about their roles and responsibilities. Are they changing? How does the change in processes affect how they act on a daily basis and what they do and where the lines get cut off, right? Skills, certainly behaviors, performance measurements, my gosh, you can't have that misaligned and expect to achieve your goals. And compensation is always important, right? That's people usually care about what they're paid. You got to make sure that's aligned.
So Mark, do you only do this at the beginning of the project?
That's a great question. And no, because things are going to change over time, aren't they? So
Mhm.
thanks,
Yeah.
Cynthia. Yeah, keep revisiting this. There might have been a seismic shift and something along the lines here because of a decision you've made as part of the project or something happening with the business. One of my favorite things is social network analysis. Let me say that you can get a PhD in this topic alone, so I don't begin to understand more than just a percent of it, but
Well, and you're not going to have the time to do the PhD version of it, just to let you know.
thank you. Let me say it very quickly then. You know what? It's important who talks to whom. Does anybody disagree with that?
Oh,
On a
absolutely
project,
agree.
we ask, how often do you interact with a team member at branch B, right? Just understanding the flow of information. The graph we got back, this is on a weekly basis. We call it the hairball. And
That's
boy,
really, really helpful.
that
Yeah.
excited management, let me tell you. So we broke that down to a daily basis and look at what's still going on, right? On a daily basis, my gosh. So you start picking this apart, you got people in the middle, boy, you better make sure they're on board with the project, right? Because they're pretty key to everything.
Yeah.
Then you've got these people floating out there that don't talk to anybody on a daily basis. Is that okay? Maybe it is, but boy, knowing that information is helpful. Then you got people where they're only getting their information from one other person. And are they getting the right things? So I wish we had more time to go through all of that and unpack that, but just understanding information flow and again, the culture and communication channels within your company and your team, pretty darn
So
important.
Mark, I think this would be an excellent next post for you on
Hey,
Get Your New View.
I'll do that. Thanks, Cynthia.
You're welcome.
Idea. There are a lot of other solutions. Talk about what will work at your company. All right. We got some bonus gifts for you. The blog I referenced, a couple other resources with great information, and I want to make sure to get to our prize giveaway. You've
Woohoo!
got our contact information there. Make sure you do survey. We've got for all you Business Central and Nav users out there a shortcut do-it-yourself origami tool that you can download, print, and fold and play with out on our website. And then
Paper
there's
version of this.
what's that?
The paper version of this.
Paper version. And you
Mhm.
can also order the foam cubes. Got that right here. And then our drawing,
What?
scan the QR code, text in, go to our website, please enter, and we would love to give away a prize to you. Thank you very much for watching today. I hope we gave you a lot of information, a lot of ideas, and a lot of actions to go go take care of. Cynthia, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. It was a blast.
Everybody take care on those 2 points, right? So are you trying to look
Mark,
forward and achieve more? Yes,
we're going to have to pause.
what happened?
There's Siri is, or what are, Alexa is talking in the background for some friggin' reason. Hold on. Sorry.
Right. All right, that's okay, because I started off getting too talkative again.
Alexa, stop.
Hey, earlier, I think I mentioned cultural alignment. We really didn't get into it, but so let's get into it. That's
Cultural
your cue.
alignment.
It really points out you can have extrinsic cultural points and you can have intrinsic.
Well, guess what? We need to apply project management practices to this presentation. We've got about 4.5 minutes left.
I thought we were running really, really long.
20 minutes. No, I put 20 hours. Yeah, we could do that.
I'm not sure. Okay, ready?